The unconscious assumption that man's work is the most imposing on Earth crumbles away, and a great hush falls over those who look at the Grand Canyon of the Colorado River for the first time. Here is a poetic vision of nature which contrasts her majesty to the insignificance of man's achievements. This immense abyss works as an anesthetic, cauterizing the senses and momentarily stunning the visitor. In the beginning, its size and beauty cannot be assimilated. Its scenery is so much grander than anything else of the kind in the world that once beheld, all other scenery becomes flat and insipid. Over millions of years, erosion has chiseled the rocks into many angular and rounded shapes, each reflecting the light and throwing shadows at its own peculiar angle. Here, unique perspectives mock conventional understanding of distances. Here, terraces of turrets, spires, and cupolas, many higher than the highest mountains of the eastern United States, are stark and gaunt, yet their beauty is ethereal. The Grand Canyon's aesthetic wonders are its geologic features, crafted by the meticulous processes of an imaginable time. Its rock stratas go back far beyond recorded history. Descending into its depths, time falls away until one vertical mile down on the dark, somber walls of the inner gorge, the Earth reveals her geologic soul in the world's oldest and largest history book. Yet its striated pages tell only part of the story. Here's antiquity, 2 billion years back, a time more ancient than man can conceive, time enough to create and destroy mountains and dry seas. Originally laid down in horizontal layers, these rocks were buckled and warped into mountains. When the Earth heaved and convulsed, the great heat and pressure generated changed the layers to crystalline schist. Molten material penetrated, creating seams of dull rose quartz. No sooner was the land built up than geologic processes began to wear it away. When only the roots of the mountains remained, advancing waters of an ancient sea submerged the eroded surface and deposited layer upon layer of sediments during the thousands upon thousands of years it took to create the Bas limestone, Hakkatai shale, and Shunumo quartzite. In the process, primitive plants and invertebrates, which are today the oldest fossils in the canyon, were entrapped and preserved. The Earth moved again, thrusting upward and downward along faults, building a new series of mountains. Erosion leveled what had been erected, and another sea intruded and laid down limestone. River flood plains followed, leaving behind a layer of hardened sand and mud, which captured the impressions of plant leaves, trilobites, and fish. Even the land on the canyon rim is time-worn, going back across the age of mammals and the age of dinosaurs, back to the end of the Paleozoic era, when the Kaibab Formation was covered with a warm sea. The size, the age would seem enough. But nature has yet another paradox to offer the bewildered visitor who is struggling to understand the vista, the turbid Colorado River. The engineer of this colossal enterprise of nature is flowing into and cutting through a mountain instead of down one, or so it seems. Glimpsed between an avenue of vertical cliffs, deep enough to conceal the Empire State Building, it travels 1,450 miles from its source in the Rocky Mountains to the Gulf of California. And so, with wind and water, rock and river, the incredible epic of erosion continues. The Colorado and all these canyons unite to form one Grand Canyon, the most sublime spectacle on Earth, 277 miles in length, 600 feet to 18 miles wide, and a mile deep. The Colorado, regardless of its tremendous cutting power, is, however, somewhat conservative. It has managed to restrain its chewing of the canyon at an estimated rate of 1,000 feet every 2 million years. Four 4,000 years ago, ancient man sought out remote caves in the red wall limestone cliffs and placed his split-twig animal figurines in the darkest recesses of the earth, practicing his sympathetic magic to ensure a successful hunt. The Havasupai are the only Indians presently living in the canyon, but the Navajo and Hopi, living close by, have woven this land into their myths and religions. Tusian Ruin, one of hundreds of prehistoric Indian dwellings, some occupied 4,000 years ago, mirrors the canyon's rich cultural history. This was a typical Anasazi settlement on the South Rim, as it probably appeared around A.D. 1150. Federal antiquities laws protect these ruins and their artifacts, and the National Park Service maintains them so that visitors may enjoy them and learn from them. Nankoweap Ruin, located 800 feet above the Colorado River, is a site once used by the Anasazi. These Indians farmed the canyon during the 12th and 13th centuries. They disappeared toward the end of the 13th century, and anthropologists can only speculate as to their fate. These Native Americans were careful with their natural environment. Later arrivals have not always been. European man first looked with dread at this cursed barrier. In 1540, searching for Cibola, the legendary cities of gold, Coronado sent Garcia Lopez de Cardenas and a small group of men on a side trip to find the great river of which the Hopi Indians spoke. These conquistadores were the first white men to gaze upon the canyon. Unable to descend to the river, they turned away from this jagged country and rejoined Coronado. The first official exploration of the Grand Canyon was undertaken in 1857 by Lieutenant Joseph Christmas Ives. Unable to descend to the Colorado River and complete his exploration, he wrote, "Ours has been the first and will doubtless be the last party of whites to visit this profitless locality. It seems intended by nature that the Colorado River, along the greater portion of its lonely and majestic way, shall be forever unvisited and undisturbed. Major John Wesley Powell, a small bearded man who had lost his right arm in the battle at Shiloh, was the first to conquer the Colorado River. Leading his expeditions through the canyons of the Grand, Green, and Colorado rivers in 1869 and 1871. When Powell began his trip with 9 other men, a large blank space, marked ominously with the words Terra Incognita, covered contemporary maps from the Upper Green River to the confluence of the Colorado and the Virgin Rivers. Stories of lethal whirlpools, of swirling rapids, and of the river sinking underground to emerge hundreds of miles away abounded about this uncharted land. Even the Indians warned Powell not to undertake this venture, telling him how the canyon had been opened by the gods to provide passage for a sorrowing chief to visit his dead wife in the happier land. They feared the impiety in trying to pass through the precipitous cliffs on its silt-choked river. But on May 24th, 1869, the boats shoved off. "13 weeks after beginning their trip down the Great Unknown, Powell and his remaining crew of 5 men emerged from their granite prison. Powell returned to Washington a hero. On his second expedition in 1871, Powell and his crew of 11 once again left Green River, Wyoming, for a more extensive exploration of the grand, gloomy depths of the river canyons. In 1882, then Senator Benjamin Harrison from Indiana introduced a bill in Congress to make Grand Canyon a national park. But it failed because a number of senators feared damage to economic interests. But the canyon triumphed. Even in man's eagerness to exploit the rich resources of this new world, the wisdom of those who sought to conserve the continent's unique wildlife and to preserve its untamed wilderness did not go unheeded. More than a century ago, North America had given birth to the brave new concept of conservation that has now been adopted throughout the world. On February 26, 1919, an act of Congress established the Grand Canyon a national park and placed it under the protection and administration of the National Park Service. In the Grand Canyon Village at the Visitor Center, park rangers provide information and orientation. Here, the Grand Canyon Natural History Association, a non-profit organization, serves visitors through the publication and sale of interpretive literature. The association also aids the National Park Service with continuing financial support of educational and research activities. In the canyon's historic district, the Hopi House, an authentic reproduction of a Hopi Indian dwelling house, and its architectural style depicting harmony with its natural setting, had a lasting effect on park architecture. At the top of the world's most famous mountain trail, the Bright Angel Trail, it is impossible not to catch the sense of adventure as the mule train begins the steep, zigzag path. Not dangerous, but terrifying. The trail follows the Bright Angel Geological Fault, the route used by the Havasupai Indians for centuries to reach their primitive farms. The seasoned hiker, lifting his home onto his shoulders, placing one foot ahead of the other, begins his journey of discovery. The spectacular Kaibab Trail offers absolute solitude, a vista of many miles in which there is neither man nor his imprint. The wind twists around the hulking presence of the steep cliffs and the strange rock formations in this stone wilderness, creating the sounds of nature as primal man must have heard them. The unwary start downward into the deceptive panorama, only to walk on and on, as in a dream of haunted sleep, unable to make progress. The elusive bottom is farther away than it appears. Grand Canyon's wildlife is a fascinating study in contrast. During the age of mammals, camels, horses, sloths, and mammoths could be found here. Although most of these creatures no longer exist, a great variety of animal life can still be seen, with over 400 vertebrate species known to occupy the environs of the canyon, such as birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. unique pink rattlesnake, varying in color from pale salmon to vermilion, is found only in the Grand Canyon. Its color may be an evolutionary change, an adaptation to the red rock among which it lives. On the canyon floor and throughout the park, the beauty and diversity of more than 1,500 species of plants and flowers, with its enormous interlinked complexity of life and climate, is equal to that of the natural range of the entire continent. The elevated north rim, with groves of golden aspens shining out against shadowy blue curtains of tall spruces and firs that make up much of the forest cover of the Kaibab Plateau, offers a totally different view of the canyon. Nature's intricate engineering of this enormous channel is much more apparent here, providing deep-side canyons, freestanding islands of rock reaching up from the canyon floor, and narrow promontories that intrude into the canyon. The eerie light cast over the land when a storm approaches creates a study in light and shadow, of contour and contrast. Thunder reverberates in the canyon and seems captured there in perpetuity, like the sound of the ocean in the seashell. Rain releases the perfumes of the dry land, filling the air with the smell of water, the aroma of dampened dust, and 1,000 other fragrances of nature when raindrops fall. The dramatic view of the canyon in the quiet mood of winter is vast, stark, raw, unnatural, and unending. And among its caprices are clouds that clothe it in billows, allowing the colorful chasm to masquerade as an ethereal thing. The Grand Canyon comes closer to illustrating the realities of eternity than perhaps any other natural phenomenon on Earth. Apart from its great depth, width, and length, it has a fourth dimension, time. Simply remember the story of the canyon began more than 1,500,000,000 years ago. As smog and noise, steel and plastic push in on us, the need increases to preserve and protect this national treasure from the destructive impact that humans can have on this fragile desert ecosystem, so that its natural sounds and silences, smells and sights predominate over those created by man. Artists have painted it. Photographers have captured its every mood, color, and magnificence. Music has been composed about it. Millions of words have been written about it. But perhaps none so eloquent as President Theodore Roosevelt's speech upon his visit in 1903. I want to ask you to keep this great wonder of nature as it is now. Do nothing to mar the wonderful grandeur, the sublimity, the great loveliness and beauty of the canyon. Leave it as it is. You cannot improve on it. The ages have been at work on it, and man can only mar it. Keep it for your children, your children's children, and for all who come after you, as the one great sight every American should see. At worst, man is an interloper in this great wonder of nature. At best, its curator and preserver.